Poland and Belarus join forces to deliver a devastating blow to Russian forces. In a shocking turn of events, the armies of Poland and Belarus have united to deal a severe blow to Russian forces. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, sensing the impending end of the Putin regime, has distanced himself from Putin and started leaning towards the United States and Western countries. Recent revelations by the British media disclosed a secret meeting between Lukashenko and high-ranking U.S. officials just 2 weeks after this meeting. Belarus and Poland formed an alliance, raising numerous questions in the mind of Vladimir Putin. And now Polish and Belarusian troops have launched a joint operation targeting Russian units in Ukrainian territory. The leader of the Wagner Group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, has sent shockwaves throughout the world by attempting a coup in Russia, destabilizing the balance of power. Known as a close associate of Vladimir Putin, Prigozhin unexpectedly seized control of the cities of Rostov and Voronezh in Russia with his Wagner soldiers. Prigozhin aimed to overthrow Russian leader Vladimir Putin and take his place. However, Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko intervened and struck a deal with Prigozhin, providing him refuge within Belarusian borders and under Lukashenko's protection. Despite the historically close relationship between Alexander Lukashenko and Vladimir Putin, Lukashenko's decision to shield Prigozhin has raised eyebrows and heightened Putin's anxiety. While Vladimir Putin publicly announced pardons for the Wagner soldiers involved in the coup attempt, secret developments behind closed doors have come to light. Although Putin granted amnesty to the Wagner soldiers, he is displeased with Prigozhin finding sanctuary in Belarus. Kremlin insiders reveal that Putin is seeking an agreement with Lukashenko to extradite Yevgeny Prigozhin to Russia. However, Lukashenko, often seen as Putin's pawn, has surprised everyone by rejecting Putin's demand. Furious at this refusal, Putin invited Lukashenko for a face-to-face meeting in Russia. Yet, just 2 days after Putin's meeting request, Lukashenko's statement indicated a deteriorating Belarus-Russia relationship and Lukashenko's efforts to align with the United States and Western countries. Lukashenko's announcement highlighted Belarus's intention to improve relations with Western nations and expressed readiness to forge agreements to strengthen ties as a gesture of goodwill to Europe. Lukashenko temporarily reduced customs duties to 0%, facilitating exports for Western companies. These statements greatly angered Russian leader Vladimir Putin. The long-standing alliance between Russia and Belarus is now on the verge of collapse due to Lukashenko's actions. However, the most captivating development unfolded when Belarus and Poland jointly launched an attack on Russian forces in Ukrainian territory. Russian government officials claim that 182 Russian soldiers lost their lives when Polish and Belarusian forces attacked Russian troops stationed in the city of Kovel, Ukraine. Kovel, a city long under Russian military control, is located in close proximity to the borders of Belarus and Poland. Recognizing its vulnerability to Polish incursion, Russian leader Vladimir Putin heightened security measures in the area following the assault on the Russian headquarters in Kovel. The statements made by an escaped Russian soldier astonished Russian government officials, according to the soldier. A substantial number of Belarusian and Polish troops crossed the Polish border into Ukrainian territory, launching an attack on the Russian headquarters. The Polish army swiftly surrounded the headquarters, blocking all entry and exit points. The escaped Russian soldier reported being caught in a crossfire between Polish and Belarusian soldiers, although these claims cannot be substantiated. The absence of Ukrainian units near the attacked area increases the likelihood of their veracity. Nonetheless, even in the absence of concrete evidence, Putin has decided to impose sanctions and an embargo on Belarus, thereby terminating his alliance with Lukashenko. Vladimir Putin's decision was largely influenced by the recent revelation that Lukashenko had a secret meeting with high-ranking U.S. officials. The British media reported that a private jet from the U.S. landed in the Belarusian capital, Minsk, carrying senior American officials. It is rumored that Lukashenko reached an agreement with the US officials to end the war between Russia and Ukraine and bring about Putin's downfall. This led Putin to believe that the allegations of an alliance between Belarus and Poland were true. Shortly after imposing sanctions, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu accused Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko of betraying Russia. This marked the first time in years that Putin imposed sanctions on Belarus. Being heavily dependent on Russia for energy, Belarus had been purchasing energy from Russia at lower prices due to Russia's abundance of oil and natural gas. However, with the imposition of sanctions by Putin, Belarus would no longer have access to energy at such low prices. Tired of Putin's threatening demeanor, Belarusian President Lukashenko addressed Putin in a statement. Lukashenko emphasized that the Russian soldiers who lost their lives in Ukrainian territory had no connection to Belarus. He stated that Putin had made wrong decisions and a grave mistake. Following this statement, Lukashenko addressed European countries. Lukashenko, after a long time, brought up the issue of European Union membership, calling on Western countries to include Belarus in the EU. As we know, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine began when Ukraine expressed its desire to join NATO. Belarus's aspiration to join the European Union is likely to further escalate tensions between Russia and Belarus. The fact that Wagner Group leader Yevgeny Prigozhin was given protection by Lukashenko had a significant impact on Putin's decision to impose sanctions on Belarus. While the world speculated on why Lukashenko provided shelter to Prigozhin, one answer emerged. It was rumored that at the behest of the US, Lukashenko was making efforts to completely tilt the balance in favor of Ukraine. The US understood the critical importance of direct support for the Ukrainian army from within. This move would benefit the Ukrainian army in various aspects, and this is exactly when Poland came into play, serving as an intermediary in the talks between the US and Belarus, and everything got mixed up. Poland has been known for providing crucial support throughout the war. It played a significant role in securing tanks and aircraft for Ukraine, which led to a global response to Putin's threatening attitude. Suddenly, the Israeli elite battalion appeared on the Polish border. A crucial move came from Israel. A significant step was taken for Poland to stand against Russia. The Israeli elite battalions suddenly appeared on the Polish border, cornering the Russians. They had no room to take the slightest step against the Ukrainian army. Once Poland ensured its security, it made a move that stunned the world. The front lines began to shake in the last days of the Russia-Ukraine war. Putin, seeking to divert attention from his own incompetence, launched a campaign to discredit the Ukrainian army's significant and strategic moves. These actions infuriated Putin, as he believed that Ukraine's progress was solely due to external support. However, things started to change. The Russian army faced shortages of ammunition and supplies, greatly affecting the soldiers' morale. Putin's attempts to resolve this issue only exacerbated the situation. Moreover, rumors of Putin's intention to invade Poland after Ukraine completely changed the landscape. The Russian soldiers fighting against the Ukrainian army were gradually withdrawing from the front lines. Despite Putin using all means to bring these soldiers back, his efforts proved futile. Following recent developments, Putin took action to turn the tide completely in his favor. He began moving his troops towards Belarus, which had previously been an ally of Poland. This move instantly caused chaos in the world, as peace seemed to be at stake. Due to Poland's critical importance and historical connection with Israel, Israel immediately took action. Although Israel openly supported Ukraine as it is not a NATO member, it couldn't openly threaten global peace. It was believed that the economic influence of Israel would provide a secure environment for its troops in Poland. And suddenly Israeli soldiers appeared on the Polish border. The elite Israeli battalion took action, and Putin was taken aback. Putin attempted to prevent Poland from gaining an advantage in terms of support by using all his connections in the region. Israel's foresight, predicting that Poland would face even greater threats, soon altered everything from Putin's perspective. If Putin wanted to fight against Poland, he would first have to contend with Israel, and that was simply not feasible. Moreover, a major blow to Russia's already sinking economy would be detrimental to everyone. Putin was forced to withdraw his troops. This was one of the biggest retreats in Russian history. In addition to the concessions made to the Ukrainian army, this retreat led to consecutive reactions from neighboring countries. At the core of these reactions was Putin's failure to demonstrate sufficient strength against the Ukrainian army. Putin suffered a major blow. The unexpected happened, and suspicions of an assassination attempt on Putin shook the whole world. Putin has made an important move. The preparations for the retaliation operation against Ukraine are nearly complete. However, Ukraine's response stunned the entire globe. Even throughout these preparations, Putin was confronted with a massive treachery. This would also assure the Russian army's exit from Ukraine. In the final days of the Ukrainian war, the Ukrainian army began to establish a significant advantage against the Russians. Ukrainian soldiers had obtained mental supremacy over Russia as a result of this advantage, while expelling Russian military elements from specific location. While this circumstance caused some agitation among the Russian army, it also allowed Putin to craft a strategy. This is the strategy that will provide the most advantages against the Ukrainian army. First and foremost, Putin intended to capitalize on the fact that he was outnumbered by Ukraine. He first announced partial mobilization for this purpose. A big number of Russian nationals have been compelled to fight for Ukraine. Following that, in response to certain groups' refusal to enlist in response to the circumstances, Putin activated the National Guard, also known as his personal army, and the National Guard began to forcefully conscript a considerable number of people. Following these events, Putin devised a new strategy, knowing that the Ukrainian army is heavily engaged in border areas with Russia. Putin began looking for a different path to invade Kiev, and when he saw that this route runs through Belarus, he instantly decided to organize a completely other operation based on bilateral agreements. Belarus played an important role in the war because it borders both Ukraine and Russia. Putin, who wants to capitalize on this important point, has announced that he will provide significant assistance to Belarus as well as natural gas reductions. As a result, Russia began to acquire the most vital location in the region at a low cost. Following that, Israeli intelligence supplied vital information with Ukraine. According to satellite photographs in Israel's possession, the Russian army has directed all of its weapons and armed forces to this location. The Ukrainian army was taken aback by the scenario, and he sent a portion of the army to the border in this area. Following these events, the Ukrainian army was set to make a significant strike against the Russians when Putin made another move. And things have reached a critical juncture. Putin has transferred advanced S-400 missile systems and nuclear missile systems to Belarus. While this crisis has had far-reaching consequences around the world, the reason for Putin's decision has also been disclosed. Putin has begun to take efforts to safeguard the security of military officers stationed in Belarus. However, he continued to prepare for this huge operation with troops in the Ukrainian region. All of the soldiers in the Ukrainian region were ordered to take defensive positions one by one. Following that, the Ukrainian army took a giant stride forward by contacting the West. The US has resolved to take specific actions to avoid this huge operation. As a result, the United States, which called Belarus to arrange a top-secret meeting, has signed a decision that entirely favors Ukraine, and the Ukrainian army has taken the upper hand over the Russians. The US has stated that if Belarus closes its borders to Russia and does not allow this operation to take place, it will begin to create strong connections with the European Union and the US. After that, Belarus, which learnt that it would be transferred to the point of European Union candidate countries, began to adjust its moves back and forth, and Putin has been faced with a massive betrayal. As a result, Putin's actions have surprised the entire world. When Putin's grandest scheme also failed, he was at a loss for what to do. When Belarus closed its borders, Putin demanded that the ammunition found within be returned as soon as possible. However, in reaction to Putin's bluster, when Belarus stated that it would gradually return it, things became absolutely confusing, and the Russian army, which was suffering from a severe lack of ammunition, began to experience more tense days. However, while Putin is expected to face further issues in the near future, another critical step was highlighted. Putin targeted Moscow with the air systems at his disposal, and he made the decision to put air defense systems in Moscow, which was one of the first times he accepted defeat. This situation has greatly complicated matters, and Putin, who indirectly endorsed the advance of the Ukrainian army, became the object of a strong public reaction. But Putin's actions in this regard are far from over, and in his victory speech, he alluded to how out of hand things had become. Putin. Russia was downplaying the war at the start of the Ukrainian conflict. Things have grown absolutely disorganized as a result of Ukraine's impending superiority in certain activities. When the Ukrainian army made major breakthroughs against the Russians, it seemed as if the Russian army had hit a brick wall. This situation laid the groundwork for a complete breakdown of affairs, and Russian military encountered numerous difficulties while fighting Ukraine. However, the Putin regime's propaganda media has kept this information buried until now. But things had become so bad that there was no longer even the smallest step left to take to hide it. As a result, Putin was forced to make public declarations. And then he delivered his victory speech. In this victory address, he acknowledged for the first time that this conflict will determine Russia's fate, and he emphasized once more that the support of the entire population is critical. This position allowed the Ukrainians, who had an advantage over the Russian forces, to choose an alternative course of action, and everyone began to strive for the number of victories over the Russian army to grow by the day. Of course, one can argue that these initiatives have delivered a significant damage to Putin's power. It was precisely at this point when the statements made by war analysts surpassed all expectations. Many things predicted from the Ukrainian army, according to war specialists, were based on Russia's impending loss because Ukraine received significant funding at the start of the war when it lacked anything like an army. The Russian army launched an unjust invasion attempt based on Ukraine's self-development and potential to achieve a level comparable to Russia has begun to hint that better days are on the way. But thanks to the backing he has gotten, it has begun to be speculated that the Ukrainian army may take some further actions against the Russians in the near future. If this level of assistance persists, it is likely that the spring offensive for which the Ukrainian army has begun preparations will take place in the near future. Even the fact that this spring operation has been revived in recent days has begun to alarm many Russian soldiers. In addition, while it appears like Ukraine will be able to turn things around in a relatively short period of time, there are essentially no hurdles remaining in its path. That is why Ukraine must take far larger moves now. And as a result of these upcoming actions against Russia, Russia's attitude toward both its friends and satellite countries will deteriorate significantly. It is only a matter of time before Russia faces much more serious issues in this region. If the Ukrainian army continues to be pressed in this manner, Russia will appear to have no way out. And this circumstance will pave the way for Ukraine to take even bolder measures forward. If the battle finishes in Ukraine's favor, Russia will take no action at this point. And understanding that Russia's military is not as strong as it once was, many satellite countries will begin to make noises against Russia. As a result of these sounds, the Ukrainian army will be able to accomplish far higher success against the Russians in all locations, and the transformation in this region will be so profound that the Russian army will never be able to rally again. An assassination attempt has been made on Russian President Vladimir Putin. This unmanned aerial vehicle mission was violently thwarted by Russian soldiers with an explosion in the Kremlin palace. Russia has declared a state of emergency. Russian President Vladimir Putin is concerned with the Russian army expanding its attacks and invasion efforts on Ukrainian territory. A large spike of explosions within Russian territory began to worry Russian leaders and residents. The recent explosions and fires within Russia have begun to erode the Russian people's trust in Putin. As previously reported, Russian officials have begun to increase security measures within Russia's borders in anticipation of an assassination attempt against Putin. Earlier, the British intelligence service reported that an assassination attempt on Russian President Vladimir Putin had occurred, but the Russian government kept this attempt a state secret. Some time ago, after Putin abruptly vanished from sight, the damage done to his armored vehicle did not escape the notice of British intelligence. A few months later, a drone that debuted in Moscow made it as far as the Kremlin Palace, and the explosion triggered by this unmanned aerial vehicle struck a significant blow to the world agenda. This unmanned aerial vehicle, assumed to have been operated by the Ukraine army, was spotted around the Kremlin residence and began to be recorded on camera by experts. However, after a while, this unmanned aerial vehicle infiltrated the Kremlin Palace without the security forces' knowledge and managed to reach the palace's top. It is the first time Ukrainian soldiers have launched an operation this close to the Kremlin in the year-long Russian-Ukrainian conflict. This human airplane, which managed to reach the Kremlin Palace, aroused widespread consternation in Russia and had a profound impact on Russian citizens. Following the discovery of unmanned aerial vehicles, the Russian army, which acted quickly, fully eliminated 2 unmanned aerial vehicles in seconds. An emergency action that destroyed unmanned aerial vehicles resulted in a huge explosion. Because of the force of the explosion, residents in the area assumed that the Ukrainian army was conducting an operation, but the reality was completely different. On the orders of Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, a huge number of Russian soldiers and police from the Russian security forces were dispatched and deployed to the Kremlin Palace. According to Russian sources, the attempted offensive was prepared by Ukrainian soldiers. According to the Russian government, Ukraine has been working for a long time to organize murder attempts against Putin, and this incident is one of these operations. According to Russian officials who indicated that the unmanned aerial vehicle was carrying explosive materials, the attack was effectively thwarted. It is the first time that Ukrainian forces who have been fighting the Russian army for almost a year have come so close to Russian President Vladimir Putin. A few weeks before this strike, Ukraine forces conducted a large air operation on the Engels base, which is located southwest of Moscow. Ukraine forces who fully neutralized the Russian army's planes at Engels Air Base with the deconflicted operation continue to undertake simultaneous air operations throughout Russia. This operation against Russian President Vladimir Putin, however, was not carried out by Ukrainian forces and was rejected. Ukrainian presidential spokesman Mikhailo Podolyak concluded his remarks by claiming that the airstrike on the Kremlin was not coordinated by Ukrainian military. Podolyak, who indicated that Ukrainian forces had nothing to do with the Kremlin operations, rejected Ksenia's assertions that she orchestrated the attacks, stating that she would have no influence over the successful execution of these attacks. Similarly, Serhiy Nikiforov, spokesman for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, indicated that the Ukrainian military, which had nothing to do with the attack, were merely defending their own area. Following the explosion, many activities arranged by the Russian government were cancelled. Russia, which annually commemorates the Soviet Union's victory in World War II on May 9, has declared for the first time that these celebrations will be cancelled this year. This explosion in the Kremlin appears to have had a significant impact on Russia. The cities where festivities were prohibited were mentioned as being in the regions closest to Ukraine's domain. Russian President Putin has considerably enhanced border security measures in order to protect Russia's border security. At the same time, Putin, fearful that these celebrations may devolve into a disaster, declared his willingness to host them in districts near to Ukraine's borders and stated that the people living in the region should not join together in any form. The Ukrainian administration, on the other hand, came out in front of the cameras again after Russian officials' statements claiming that the explosion in the Kremlin had nothing to do with Ukrainian forces. Following these declarations, all eyes were focused on pro-Ukrainian resistance organizations. These resistance groups, on the other hand, had thwarted Russian invasion attempts on Ukrainian land by trying sabotage at numerous sites where the Russian army had recently been active on Ukrainian territory. These rebel elements, which organized actions at several sites, were blamed for the Kremlin explosives. These pro-Ukrainian terrorists have become one of Russian leader Vladimir Putin's greatest threats, having already carried out several attacks on natural gas and oil production facilities, one of Russia's largest sources of wealth, and most recently, explosions and flames along the Russian border and on the Crimean Peninsula have made Russians concerned. Faced with these explosions and fires, the Russian people progressively lost faith in Putin. Russian citizens who feel that their lives are in great risk are urging Putin to put an end to this scenario. These pro-Ukrainian insurgents who have repeatedly attempted to damage the Russian army's supply channels in Crimea continue to actively carry out all operations that could affect the Russian army. The leader of one of the rebel units just destroyed a railway utilized by the Russian army, dealing a significant blow to the Russian army. The commander of this resistance organization announced on his social media accounts that they will fight until the end for Ukraine's independence and the complete removal of Russian military from Ukrainian soil. Russian President Vladimir Putin has not only expanded Russia's security measures, but has also begun to reinforce defense lines in Ukraine-occupied areas. The Russian army, which has been engaged in occupation attempts on Ukrainian land for almost a year, is now fatigued. The vast majority of Russian army men do not want to fight in this conflict anymore. One of the main causes for this situation is that Putin does not care enough about Russian forces fighting on Ukrainian land to provide even their most basic necessities. One of these factors is the racism that exists in the army. Many troops made up of minority citizens face harsh conditions from troops manned by Russian soldiers. The Russian army, which was able to move on Ukrainian territory relatively freely in the early months of the war, is no longer able to do so. Ukrainian forces, which are growing stronger by the day thanks to incoming help, are destroying the Russian army on multiple fronts and regions.